Hello Tinto Perks, my name is Ina and today I'm going to give you the third lecture on diversity, to be more specific about cross-cultural communication. In the previous lectures we already talked about stereotypes, we talked about open-mindedness, so make sure that you check it out. But today we will continue talking about how to communicate efficiently in a diverse team environment. So let's move to the first slide. You can just see here the picture which gives you a clear example how confusing it can be to communicate with someone who represents totally different culture and therefore has totally different mindset. And I want us to start with the definition. What is the culture? And even so, it sounds super easy, super straightforward, super obvious. I still want this aspect to be covered. So culture is a way of thinking and living whereby one picks up a set of attitudes, values, norms, and beliefs that are taught and reinforced by other members in the group. So the first thing I want you to remember is that it is about set of attitudes, values, norms, and beliefs. So we all have different values, we all have different beliefs. We treat people differently, we think differently based on our culture and also based on our background. It is important to remember that it is not only about the cultural aspect, but it is also about the fact that we were raised differently in different environment. So let's go ahead. This set of basic assumptions and solutions to the problem of the world is a shared system that is passed on from generation to generation to ensure survival. This is the second point I wanted to remember. Do you realize how silly it is to judge someone, to discriminate someone, to blame someone based on something which was passed from generation to generation? So the person has nothing to do with that. It was already passed to this person. So I just want you to keep this in mind. And let's go to the next slide. Next slide is going to be about 10 tips to maintain effective cross-cultural communication. And let's just go one by one. First of all, maintain etiquette. So remember that it is important. If you, for example, have a meeting with someone from a different culture, it is useful, it can be useful, just to Google at least some basic information about that culture, just to know some basic stuff. So remember that what is acceptable in Japan might not be acceptable in America. Just an example, yeah? Second, avoid slang. Slang is something very unique, It can also differ from culture to culture, and especially if you talk to the person who represents different generation, who is much older than you are, then that person might not even know about slang. And another example, I'm young, but I don't know slang. Honestly, my friends know that they shouldn't use any slang when they talk to me because, I just don't like slang, so I never learned it. And I don't find it pretty to talk with slang, So anytime when you talk with someone from different culture, person who you don't know, never met before, don't use slang. Speak slowly. In some cultures, it is acceptable to speak very fast. And people say that Russian people speak super fast. I haven't noticed it myself, probably because I'm a native speaker. But now sometimes when I also try to analyze it, I notice that yes, some countries, some cultures, they have tendency to speak faster and quicker rather than the other ones. So also keep it in mind. Keep it simple. I know that you might know so many fancy words which you want to show, which you want just to use constantly. But the knowledge of the language is something different from the communication, because you might not speak incredibly cool, you might not know all grammar and all fancy words from the dictionary, but you can be so good at the communication, understanding people and empathizing with them. At the same time, you might have great language knowledge, but poor communication. And if you will use, fancy words, people might not understand you. Don't make life more difficult, more complicated for other people and for yourself as well. I just remember myself using once in a meeting the word succinct. and they didn't get me. And I mean, it wasn't a nice feeling for them, it wasn't a nice feeling for me either. So try to keep it simple, because it's at the end of the day, it's all about how we feel, you know. Practice active listening. So try not only to talk, but of course also listen. Empathize with the person you're talking to. Take turns to talk. That's pretty obvious, yeah. Write things down. Sometimes if you feel that the person might not understand something, it's also very cool, you know, just to draw or make like a small note. Don't hesitate to write something on the paper. That's totally all right. Write things down. Avoid closed questions. Just an example, yeah. So you ask a question. So did you understand what I said? And the person can say yes, no, yeah. Better ask, oh, could you tell me what you're gonna do next? This will also engage the person in the conversation, and you will also see whether the person really understood what you said or not. So try to ask open questions instead. Be careful with humor. Humor is a very, you know, very interesting, it's very fun, you know, if you can make jokes and stuff, but people might not understand you sometimes. And also humor differs from the country to country. So very often when Slavic people joke, other people might not understand, because it's like really cultural jokes which can be understood only by the people from that country. So try to be very careful. It's nice to joke, but just, you know, keep in mind that people might not understand you, and it can also create very confusing, awkward situations. And be supportive. So if, for example, if you see that the person is struggling, just, you know, support. Use jokes if it is appropriate. Okay, then we move forward. So work in a multicultural team. How does it feel? I just wanted to give a few tips more. First of all, as a team member, you need to know that your culture is respected and is not considered less relevant. This is a responsibility of each and every member of the group, of managers and leadership alike. So it is important to keep in mind that you have rights, that's totally fine. And it is important to be aware of your own culture, to be aware of the stereotypes about your culture, about your country. So keep in mind that you are respected, you should be respected everywhere, and make sure that this is how you're treated in any work team environment. The second tip is going to be, you need to be open to input and to being challenged. Have an open ear for different perspectives, and make sure you speak to many audiences. Here I just want I want to share with you audience approach. Audience approach is basically about constantly asking yourself questions. Who are you talking to? Who are those people in a team with you? Who is my audience? Who am I going to speak to today? Who is going to be in this meeting? How many will there be? It's always about focus on people. Before you start doing any task, any job, any project, ask yourself who are going to be the people who you're going to work with. This is the audience approach. People come first. Okay, next slide is actually my favorite slide, because it's just so important and it's so interesting to learn. You need to consider 5 factors, it's 5, right? Yeah, it's 5 factors about any culture before you start communicating with people of those cultures. So the first factor you always need to keep in mind is individualism or collectivism. Some countries are more collectivistic, and some countries are more individualistic. If you talk about Europe, you will see that people more concentrated on self-improvement and personal growth. But if you go to Asia, you will see that it's a lot about collective, you know, collectivistic work. It's a lot about being together and building strong relationship with co-workers, with boss. So it's a lot about prioritizing not only your own ideas and your own personal growth, but it's about contributing a lot to the company and to the people you work with, to their well-being. So it's very important to keep in mind. Are people more individualistic or more focused on groups and the community? This is the question you ask yourself. The second is about masculinity and femininity. How important is competition, achievement, and success? Or is caring for others and the quality of life more important? We know that feminine females are considered more like caring people, more patient, while masculinity is all about achieving, competing. So just consider it that some countries it's a lot about proceeding in your career, growing in your career, while other countries they're more about caring. It's more about the quality of life, more about balance. Good example, Scandinavia is definitely about femininity, because people here they live really balanced life, and it's not about achieving constantly, but it is about just living and enjoying the life, being happy. Masculinity, I think it's a great example. Again, Europe, you can take any country in Europe, Russia as well, America is just a great example of that. Uncertainty avoidance. Do people try to control the future and plan everything, or do they just let it happen? Here I can give you a tip. When you try to analyze the country based on uncertainty avoidance, think about the nature. How people in the country treat the nature. Do they try to obey the nature, so stay in balance with that? Or they try to go beyond that, they try to prevail, dominate. So here is an example. For example, Russia, we have very rich culture, we have a really rich nature, a lot of forests, and Russia really tries to dominate the nature. While if you go to Hong Kong is in China, and you will notice that there is a jungle and city, and it's fit, it's together. People respect the nature. Also Australia, there are a lot of species, a lot of animals in there which do not live anywhere else, and the government really takes care of those animals. They try to keep the nature as it is and do not interfere with that. So think about the nature when it comes to uncertainty and avoidance, to understand the culture more. Long-term orientation. How do people look at the past, the present, and the challenges of the future? Here, think about traditions. Which countries keep their traditions and which not that much? For example, Asia again, like South Korea, very traditional country. Very strong family values. In Europe, I think you can see it less, observe it less. And those countries who are more traditional, they usually, for them it's more difficult to change. They have the resistance to change. And this is important to keep in mind, that if you work in an environment, in a country which is more traditional, it might be very difficult to bring an innovation. It's possible, of course, but you just need to keep in mind that you need to be patient, and you need to use different approach. And the last one is indulgence. What is people's attitude towards enjoying life and fun as opposed to obligations and work? That's pretty straightforward, and I also talked about it already. Very important, learn these factors, and they will help you dramatically much when it comes to team environment, diverse team environment. But there are also just a few basic rules which you need to keep in mind, which, if you don't know much about the culture, just keep these 3 points and it's already enough, so that you don't feel awkward. So acceptance, it's about acceptance. Acceptance is essential. You need to maintain standards of respectable behavior. And the first important point of respectable behavior is that team members should contribute to and not hinder the team's mission or harm the delivery of the team's customer. You have common goal. You have a goal in common. It's your, for example, customer. And always concentrate, focus on the customer. Make sure that the customer is satisfied, and therefore make sure that the communication in a team is good enough so that it doesn't hinder any processes, which consequently lead to the outcome. Team members should not damage the cohesion of the team or prevent it from becoming more effective. And team members should not unnecessarily harm the interests of other team members. So these three factors, these three core principles you should always keep in mind. Okay, something else important about communication, let's take a look at this picture, is that there are three elements of face-to-face communication. And 60% of the communication is about body language, 10% about what you say, about verbal communication, and 30% about the tone. Tone is the way we speak. So you can speak very fast, or you can also be very slow. You can talk gently, or you can talk very aggressive. And some languages, they just sound aggressive. And people think that something is going wrong there, but it's just language, So always keep in mind that different languages, they sound differently. Compare Russian, German with French, and you will notice it immediately. And also pauses. So it's about whether you make any pauses or you just, speak without any pauses. So important to keep in mind. And then, I think you've heard of that already, but body language is a lot. It means a lot when it comes to communication. And first of all, it's about facial expression, whether you look engaged, enthusiastic, or you're disappointed, unsatisfied. That can also be the case. Gaze, the way you look, looking at the other person or away from them, paying attention or not. Sometimes when you're confused or you feel awkward, uncomfortable, you cannot really look into the eyes. But keep in mind that it indicates certain things, and make sure that you try to look in the eyes to the person you're talking to. Gestures, arm and hand movements. Very often I'm doing that because I cannot just talk differently. So also very important to remember that posture. Leaning forward means that I'm more interested in you, that I'm really engaged in the conversation. Or for example, leaning back, keeping distance from the opponent means that, I'm bored, or I'm not very interested, or like I don't like you. So indicate, just keep in mind what it indicates. So let's move forward. Of course, it's great to learn tips how to communicate efficiently, but I think it is also very important to know the sources of miscommunication, what creates miscommunication in cross-cultural exchanges. And the first point is assumption of similarities. It is a tendency to think how we behave and act is a universally accepted rule of behavior. When someone differs, we have a negative view of them, just to keep in mind. Second, language differences. Problems occur when there is an inability to understand what the other is saying because different languages are being spoken. Talking the same language itself can sometimes lead to discrepancies, as some words have different meanings in various contexts, countries, and cultures. I experienced it myself when I just arrived to the Netherlands, and I talked to a guy and he asked me the question, which was, do you go to coffee shops? And I was like, of course I drink coffee, I go to coffee shops. But he meant weed, and I didn't know that, that people smoke so much weed in the Netherlands, and I didn't know that coffee shops are actually for smoking. So, it was an awkward situation. Of course, not him. Other person explained me what he meant. And I was like, nice. What that person thinks right now about me. But you can see that there are differences. Next, non-verbal misinterpretation. The way we dress, the way we express ourselves through our body language, eye contact, and gestures also communicate something. A simple gesture like nodding the head is considered to be yes in certain cultures and no in others. Let's think about more straightforward cultures, like for example Dutch culture or Russian culture. When a person is nodding a head, it means that the person agrees with you. However, in Indians, they're also nodding their head. It doesn't mean they agree. It means that they hear you, they're listening to you, they understand what you're saying, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they agree with you. So also keep in mind that. Next, preconceptions and stereotypes. Stereotypes involve putting people into predefined slots based on our image of how we think they are or should be. I'm not gonna stop here for a long time because we have entire lecture on stereotypes, so make sure you check it, okay? Next, tendency to evaluate. Humans tend to make sense of the behavior and communication of others by analyzing them from one's own cultural point of view, without taking into consideration why the other person is behaving or communicating a certain way. I also talked about it, I think, in the first lecture about open-mindedness, that it is very important before you say something, if you, for example, disagree, just, take a few seconds, maybe a minute to think about it, to rationally think about what was said, and then decide whether you want to disagree or agree with that. Yeah. And last point is high anxiety. Sometimes being confronted with a different cultural perspective will create an anxious state in an individual who does not know how to act or behave and what is considered to be appropriate. Yeah, miscommunication very often creates this anxious state that you're nervous, so it's important also to keep in mind that. The last part of my presentation is called Why Don't They Speak English? My goodness, I observed this kind of situation so many times towards other people, also my friends. Some people, they are so confident about their language skills so that they start judging others by their language skills. And here I just want to devote a small part of my presentation explaining why you shouldn't do that. So let's move to the last slide of this presentation. Learning a new language as an adult is not an easy task, and many factors can make it particularly difficult and in some cases almost impossible. Show respect. So, what I want you to remember. Now, please listen to me very carefully. Some languages are more similar to English than others. The more similar the first language, the easier it is to learn English. Languages such as Italian and German share an alphabet and script with English. There are even strong similarities between certain words. Japanese, Russian, and English have nothing in common. Each language uses a different script, alphabet, and characters, and utilizes totally different sounds and words. It's much harder to learn English from Japanese than it is from German or Italian. English proficiency does not reflect on certain groups' will to learn, but rather on the complexity of the task. I want you to keep this in mind when you talk to someone who is not a native speaker next time. Especially English native speakers, sometimes they believe that everyone should know English because it's just international language. It's spoken globally. Well, English is beneficial. English is very important. But let's remember that the complexity of this task of learning English or any other language varies from culture to culture, and we all have different backgrounds, and for some people it was an easier task to learn in English, while for others it was very difficult because they didn't have enough resources for that. So let's show respect to anyone on this planet. That was my last word. I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and I'm looking forward for our next lecture. Make sure to comment if you have something to say, and yeah, we are always there for you. Have a nice day.